I would tell you that the question I get asked the most often is, should a nonprofit have a reserve? Should we have cash reserves? Well, the direct answer to this question is yes. And I would say at least 2 months. That number comes from the nonprofit industry ratio for days cash on hand, which is 60 days is what's recommended. And so I recommend that at least 2 months of cash reserves or reserves that are on hand. Okay, there are times though where you want to grow to have more than 2 months of reserves. Let me give you a few examples. In the first one, let's say you have a concentration in your funding sources. This could be maybe by individuals. So if you receive contributions to fund a significant part of your programs, your operations, and let's just say that your budget was $120,000, but you have one donor who makes up a third or a fourth of that. Well, that's a pretty large concentration of risk in one particular relationship. So I would recommend increasing your reserves to potentially match the percentage that person contributes to your overall budget in reserve. So if they're 25% of your budget, then you would want 25% of your budget in operating reserves. Another example would be if you have grant funding that has really like a lag or there's a timing issue. So you have a fee-for-service arrangement with a grantor source, so you provide services and then you bill in arrears for those services. You can often be found waiting 2, 3, goodness, even sometimes 6 months to get that reimbursement. So that can really affect your cash flow. And in situations like that, it's very much recommended that you increase your cash reserves to align with the delay or the timing issue that you have in collecting those revenues. The last example is if you're in a capital campaign or you're getting ready to do a building project. These are very, very delicate times in a nonprofit. There's a lot of disequilibrium that can happen in the finances during a time like that. So before going into an unpredictable season like that, it's really important to be prepared. And I would say double your reserves is a good place to start. You may even want to look at being very strong and having, even more than twice your normal number. So instead of having 2 months, have 4 months, or depending on the variables that you're looking at. For example, like a high amount of pledges. So you have a lot of people that pledge to participate in the capital project. If that number is really high, you may want to increase your reserves to even maybe 6 months in that example. Okay, so if you're listening to this and you're thinking 2, 4, 6, what if I have 0? Okay. So if you have 0 reserves, it's true that the best time to start a reserve or the best time to plant a tree was 20 years ago. The second best time, it's today. I would just tell you, get started. And the practical way that I see it actually get accomplished is make it a part of your budget so that you're budgeting for, let's just say that you're going to budget to put a month in there. And you had $120,000 budget. Well, you would budget to put $10,000 away this year. So you'd want to live on 90% or operate your ministry on 90%, and 10% would fall to the bottom line and be tucked away as reserves, which is a really good final question for you or conversation for you here. When we talk about reserves, most people are thinking about the actual physical cash. And so they focus on putting this money in a separate bank account or separating it in some way that shows, okay, these are our emergency reserves in our asset or cash side of the balance sheet. That's valuable and important because those funds are long-term and you may be able to invest them and get a return on your money. But it also needs to be reflected in the net assets section of your balance sheet, or in nonprofits, it's called a statement of financial position. And the reason for this is because your net assets section of your financials conveys very important things. And so you would want these reserves to show up in your net assets as designated for reserves or designated for cash reserves or designated for emergency fund. You can pick the term that your board would recognize. And you should also have a conversation about that policy. Why are we making this decision about how much to set aside? And doing so will be able to make your financial statements clear as to why you're accumulating cash and what it's for. You can hear me talk a little bit more about net assets in another one of my blogs. I'll link to it here to make it easy for you.